energy, aren't I? Welcome to the March Core Update panel. First of all, though, what a lovely problem to have, this many people fitting in the room. It's good. It's nice. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. So I'm going to start, you know who these are, they don't need introducing, so I'm just going to go straight into the context. The internet's growing, everything's growing, and Google is kind of, let's say for the sake of the argument, it's the internet as we understand it, how we interact with it largely. Some of you might be doing other things. And the way that Google ranks content has been evolving for a long time. You probably saw in the invitation that we've kind of called this the biggest update in a decade. I was lucky enough to be working in marketing when this large sort of set of updates a decade ago happened. They had cool names like Panda and Penguin. Now they're just called March Core Update. But they are sort of similar to what's happening now, maybe like an echo of that. A bit problematic in some ways, but a bit interesting in other ways. And I guess we'll talk about how that may or may not affect us. But one of the reasons we're talking about the updates from a decade ago is because Panda targeted content farms, but content in general, and Penguin targeted link farms. Now, I'm not saying we do either of those things, but some of the services we offer are adjacent, adjacent. And I think it's interesting to just talk about content and linking in general. And that's my rather rusty segue into now we're here in March. We've got the March Core Update. And that leads me to my question, which is, what is the March Core Update?
Thank you, Matt. So I think we can definitely start off with a broad look at it and then maybe go in more detail into a few specific areas that will have the most impact for us as a business. And I think, when you hear some of the terms flying around that we mentioned about how significant it is, I think initially it probably sounds like a lot of hyperbole because we're often hearing noises like this around every subsequent Google update that comes along. Oh, it's going to be a sea change for the industry, and then things are volatile for a while and then very much tend to settle down. What's different this time is Google haven't just said that they're doing massive changes considering different factors, but actually we're seeing the impact and feeling the impacts on sites as well. So a lot of sites, for example, have been completely de-indexed and have zero visibility following this update or a series of updates. It seems to be having a significant impact on ultimately publishers' bottom lines. And I think that's why there is so much buzz around this particular update. And I suppose to break it down into a few key themes and what Google is looking to address. So as you mentioned, very content focused. They say they want to kind of clean up the web of unhelpful content. And the way they're doing that is ultimately looking at a few different indicators that they feel contribute to this. So a few things just off the bat, they have addressed what they consider to be scale content abuse. Now this essentially is creating content by automation for content's sake. So very similar to what you were mentioning about content farms in the past. Obviously, they've got more sophisticated in the era of AI. But the example Google gives is, websites that pretend to answer questions people have, but the answer doesn't exist. So, really obvious example might be, when is series 6 of this TV show coming out? And no one knows because it's not been announced. But there'll be tons of articles out there that promise you the answer. It's only when you read down 700, 800 words you realise they don't have a bloody clue either. So that's kind of one of the fundamental factors they're looking at. Another one is quite old hat when it comes to SEO, but expired domain abuse. And for those who don't know, this is essentially when you purchase a domain someone else has had over a long period of time. It's kind of established from an authority and potentially rankings perspective, but the owner of that domain has let it expire and lapse, so someone else can then come along, register that domain, start creating content and essentially pretending to be that long-standing media publication. And this, despite Google saying they've been going after it for years and years, is still a tactic we see work in SEO. So people have been doing it at length. One of the other big things is what Google are calling site reputation abuse, we would call it parasite SEO or piggyback SEO. I think that's probably one worth tackling separately with the other panelists. But the final one really is about what Google considers to be helpful content, so rewarding sites that are able to show they create content for humans which is helpful, will answer the questions they have, will meet their needs, will make them happy, will cater to their intention. And I think they've quoted a number like they're looking to rid their index of around 40-50% of unhelpful content sites. And with that in mind, there has been a lot of sites that have fallen foul of these different algorithm updates, and it really is creating a bit of a sea change in, I guess, organic search, organic traffic, and that's kind of brings us to where we are today. And I guess we can start going into a bit more detail on some of the points you feel would be most pertinent.
Well, I suppose, how do we determine, like, is it transparent what constitutes helpful content? And how do we deal with your chuckling? I guess the answer is no, not necessarily. How do we navigate that, I suppose, because we don't necessarily want to be seen as gaming Google.
Absolutely.
We need to understand how to do
something useful. Dan and Martin have very strong thoughts on this, so I'm sure they can come in.
I mean, I'm happy to give a partial opinion. So I'm not involved in SEO day to day as these experts are, but I do read an awful lot, like religiously, obsessively, to try and see what other people are finding. Typically on cesspits like Twitter, where there's so much toxicity, but there is some information there. And I think one of the things that's striking people right now is how there's the lack of fairness about this. And people who are hit by an update always say, well, it's not fair, but then you might then reflect on Penguin Panda and stuff and say, oh yeah, we did do that bad thing and it's legitimate. With this, it's quite gaslighty, it feels, because this term helpful content, the instructions from Google for quite a long time has been show experience, expertise, authority, trust. Anyone on the content team will know about that. So that led people to have author bios, navigation aids, stuff to help people uncover different aspects of content, citing sources, long form, description, rationale. And that is a form of help, but they've now then seemed to switch that entirely almost to bite-sized content, single sentence responses, which is what leads into people searching for, or even for sites like Reddit ranking, where you just get the immediate answer. So similar to the when is season 6 coming out? Season 6 is coming out now, or we don't know. I think that's a difficult bit because Google's been saying so long, this is what helpful content is, but now they're saying actually it's probably not those long form content with the author bios and stuff like that you've been doing. It might just be a forum comment, and I think that's a really, really difficult thing. So when we think about what Google wants, it's like, what does Google say it wants? What does it actually police? Is that legitimate? If it's legitimate or not legitimate, can we do anything about it? I think that's a really difficult thing for us as an agency to figure out. What do we do? Because other people will be affected differently. The affiliate tier will be hit harder than some retailer, which I guess we'll talk about a bit later. But I think that's the kind of critical thinking aspect of this. I think would be good for people to reflect on is what's Google saying? We need to know that bit. Can we take that at face value? And then how legitimate are the gripes that people have? Because if Google's changing the game and saying, oh no, well, this is what we meant by helpful all along, that's not true.
I think just to come in on one point there, certainly if you spend enough time on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., it can become, I suppose, like a little bit of an echo chamber of people kind of parroting Google's way or the highway sort of thing. And I think what we've always looked to do as an agency is bring a healthy dose of kind of cynicism and skepticism to what they say versus what they're actually doing. And it seems to me, at least, people are now seeing those direct contradictions, and therefore, people are being a bit more, I suppose, open-minded to there might be something that doesn't quite stack up here.
I think that does become a bit more evident. I think that's kind of a really difficult thing for anyone who's new in SEO or who doesn't deal with it regularly. Is the critical thinking aspect of this, because it's really difficult to figure out, is somebody an idiot but they're right? Is somebody really sensible and logical but they've got biases or prejudices that blind them from the actual truth of things? So this, again, hoovering up the toxic stuff on Twitter, there is some good stuff in there, but as Chris says, there are people on there who are very well regarded with massive followings, big SEO influencers, but they really seem to want to get a pat on the head from Google, so they will parrot what Google says, even if we transparently know this is not the case. And you look at them posting on Twitter 12 times a day, and you think, well, what actual client work are you doing that you're basing this on? Because it seems like you can't possibly be doing that. Then there's people who are very black hat, spammy SEO people who actually do know a thing or two. They might get some things badly wrong, but they get other things quite right because they experiment a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge for us is to run some experiments where we can, and then also hoover up some data where we can and apply a critical thinking mindset to it to figure out, are people not nice, we don't like them, but they're correct, or they're lovely people, but they've got an angle. And big SEO agencies will often have an angle. People who only sell content will say, oh, the answer is always content. People who only sell links will say, oh, the answer is links. So that's again another thing that muddies the waters when we are pitching against other agencies. We're very fortunate here in that we can offer a lot of different things, but other people will be polluting the debate because of their own angles, and also because they want to say that the answer is whatever they happen to sell. So that kind of makes things more difficult when you're getting this information, but I think everybody here has to hoover up some of that information to get to grip with the debate somehow.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the helpful content update in particular, obviously it was something that was released back in September, but there's two sort of particular key pieces of wording from Google which sort of highlights what that's all about. So the first being that it's confirmed that Google implements a site ranking as well as a content ranking. So, I mean, these systems which I'm just about to sort of dive into are completely hypothetical ideas, because unfortunately Google doesn't tell us exactly what those weightings and rankings are, otherwise mine and Chris' job will be very easy. But yeah, say you've got a piece of content which Google could rank 80 out of 100, fairly solid piece of content, but then they look into your site and say rank it a 0.3 out of 1, all of a sudden you can sort of multiply that together and come out with a score of 24, and also all of a sudden your 80 rated content is down to 24, and it's going to sort of shift that lower down the ranking. So that's the sort of ranking and idealistic view that Google are taking, which we're dealing with here. Instead, taking into account their sort of site ranking as well.
And that is
content.
Also different to what they were saying for ages, which was, guys, we want to surface the best possible content. If it's a tiny, tiny website and that one page is the best content, we'll rank that. Whereas now it seems really, really quite aggressive site-wide classification that's affecting the whole thing, which again is doubly unfair for any small affiliate because they don't have the resources to correct that. And so far it seems like there's nobody who's been able to dig their way out of that so far since September maybe. So that's really, really difficult. And again, that example of Google gaslighting, saying one thing and then doing something else.
I think it's really evident in the search results pretty much for any given topic. You'll see, regardless of the niche, top 10 results, you likely see Forbes, Daily Mail, educational site like Harvard, for example. So a few examples there. I think Daily Mail is ranking number 1 for best VPNs compared or something. So obviously not what you'd expect to be their area of expertise. The Harvard site was as simple as some students being bribed to post a blog with commercial links in it. Google had said this site is really authoritative, therefore anything they produce is amazing, straight to position 1 for a really competitive term. So we're definitely seeing, I think, that weighting Dan mentioned, leaning more into the site-wide authority classification. Now, I suppose just to say, obviously, we on the SEO team will use things like domain authority, domain rating as kind of a milestone for a site's overall value. We're not quite talking about the same thing here. This is Google's classification. It's not a third-party measure, but it might well cause the industry to start going back down, that route of prioritising things like authority over other factors.
I think what we've already seen is some other agencies or experts in the industry sort of coining new sort of content styles as well to cater to sort of page level stamp of approval that Google are now giving. So they're dubbing it ranch style content, which I guess is lots of mini pieces that overall encompass a really big topic in favour of what we would have called more long form content in the past, I guess. So they've got that advantage by claiming that it now works for this massive update. Whether it does and they have the cases is definitely too early to be
Yeah, I
seen.
suppose that's-
But there is something to be said commercially and competitively. Our best practice approach would not be to replicate that, but people are trying to jump on the trend, so to speak, and say we've got a remedy for this potential massive hot topic.
Is that like a gold rush scenario? Or
Yeah,
sort of
exactly.
like
Well, it's
quick
too early
sort
to
of
say
thing?
them
Well,
at
this
the
is the
minute,
thing.
but,
Some people will be duped, won't they?
But the point essentially was that people are already trying to show that they can maximise or reap benefits in various ways to sort of help potential problems that people are facing now across the board.
So I suppose like an example of that is if someone's searching for how to play casino games, for example. In the past, we might have seen, I guess, very skyscrapery style content performing well.
Yeah.
Now is it a case of kind of breaking down those searches into more, I guess, granular bite-sized questions? So rather than how to play casino games, it might be what is the RTP of casino games, and then they'll create separate articles catering to each of those.
So essentially, instead of getting that one really strong piece of content, you're breaking it into 6 pieces that, in the eyes of Google, will get a strong page level vote, and then that plays into the overall site or domain rating that they get. So you effectively maximise your eventual score with marginal gains.
Sounds like spread betting a little bit as
exactly,
well.
Yeah.
So I think two prime examples of that style of content would be Reddit and Quora. We've seen already that because of this heavy weighting on this site ranking, that those kind of sites can feel sort of invincible to these updates. Particularly if you're writing content. I mean, one example which we have found, if you're looking for something quite serious in a law context, so one keyword which we have seen, which is, can someone record me without my consent? Your top 2 answers for that search term are Quora and Reddit, not law firms who specialise in that area
Which
of law.
feels directly against like EAT,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Exactly
It
that.
must be very confusing for people, or even for us, I suppose. But imagine people running their own site or smaller businesses. Like, how are we supposed to feel like we're creating helpful content
Yeah.
if it's so unclear, even from their guidelines, but then also from how they actually act and how they treat those publishers that do hit the top?
Yeah, and I mean the second parameter from the helpful content update is site accomplishment. So when you're actually visiting a site, are you actually accomplishing what the user wants to do there? So another consideration which we, or an area which we have found have been hit pretty heavily is affiliate sites.
Mm-hmm.
So affiliate links in their nature are getting people off your site to another site. So from Google's perspective, it seems like they're trying to cut out the middle person, because your goal on your site is to get people off your site, which doesn't make sense in their eyes. They're looking to provide the best user experience possible and drive you direct to the source.
Mm-hmm. But how do you equate that with, say, the Daily Mail ranking for top 10 VPNs? I suppose the point of that is for someone to click on a monetized link to go there, right?
I think this is where we have to doubt Google's abilities and say, look, they're applying what seems to be very, very blunt tools here, and that's kind of why I also think we're a little bit, paralysed, because I don't think we can take a view on this right now, because I reckon they might roll this stuff back in August.
I was going to ask.
I think it's really tricky. But then again, if clients are asking us stuff, do we just say, "Oh, just wait till August"? I don't know, because it seems very, very blunt.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, it's quite tough, particularly in the case of Reddit, because you've got a forum where they're using models to interpret signals to rank things, but you don't know, for anyone who doesn't know, on Reddit you get like a like or dislike in the form of an upvote or a downvote, but people might be downvoting things that are completely accurate and factual, but just because they don't like it. So,
and also, the conspiracies are not very well. They're there. Everyone thinks that Reddit's awash with bots. Yeah. A voting system is very easily manipulated if there's no real effort to moderate it. I guess you're creating your own internal, very easily swayable ranking system through Reddit.
For me, it feels like probably Google have gone a bit too far in prioritising the experience aspect of EAT, which was the latest, I suppose, thing to be added to that just probably about 18 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And initially those efforts focused on, I guess, giving a voice to user-generated content and real user experiences. And I think what they've determined is that forums, sites like Reddit and Quora provide more authentic, real user engagement compared to, say, affiliate sites who might be reviewing products but clearly have a very commercial agenda. But as Martin said, I think that's far too black and white way of looking at it. As a result, they seem to have applied really broad and blunt classifiers, which are seeing those types of sites being rewarded across the board, regardless of whether the conversations taking place have any substance, against what might actually be a very expert, impartial review that happens to sit on an affiliate site, for example. And I will say on this, whilst I suppose there's no direct evidence of something quite underhand going on, Google have recently signed a partnership deal with Reddit worth billions of dollars, which will basically give them unfettered access to data either way. So you've got to question how does that kind of play into their organic positioning tripling since September last year.
Do you think it's fair to say as well that the language and style and tone on Reddit is probably going to be quite different to, well, probably a lot of people and how they search? So there's sort of a perpetuating situation where Google's models are being impacted by a specific way of communication that perhaps doesn't reflect well for all businesses.
Well, that's it, because if we are seeing, I suppose anomalous results being ranked high on Reddit, for example, that when people are clicking on those because they're ranked number one, is that saying to Google, loads of people are clicking on Reddit, they must be getting what they want from it? So, like you say, it feels kind of self-fulfilling to an extent, and I think something's gonna have to come along to kind of break that cycle. Like we said, it might be a rollback. It might actually be going back to very 2010 ways of leveraging platforms like Reddit and Quora to drive community engagement for brands.
I think it's hopefully not too broad of a concept, but how much does this reflect a move towards? Does Google feel like it's scrambling to do something new? I suppose we have SGE coming out, Search Generative Experience, and that may change the way that the SERPs are displayed. We're obviously seeing quite a massive change in the way that they classify and then rank content. It seems relevant then that the way it is planning to perhaps display content could be related to this.
I think it's an interesting time. A month or so ago, Google announced their new head of search, Liz Reed, whose background before this was doing like core search experiments on things like local search maps, but also some of the, I guess, features that are commonplace in the SERPs themselves. So there does seem to be that kind of disruptive sort of mindset at the minute. And I think, to kind of directly answer the question, I think Google are terrified about the impact of AI and how it's going to affect their revenues. And I think principally in the fact that if, as a result of AI search results being delivered to users, what are they missing out on from their display network, for example, when they use, or PPC network? So I think they're kind of caught between that, but then also seeing how the wider tech industry is going and embracing AI. So it feels like it's quite an awkward intersection at the moment.
I mean, I don't think we can tell too much, but I think with new staff and all that kind of stuff, that can throw up some changes. But it also feels like there's no master plan with Google. I mean, we kind of talk about it as if it's like some hive mind, but I think on a corporate level there's more upset than there's been in a long time. I think we're going to get a new CEO soon, probably. We've got activist investors. This is a difficult bit, and again, the frustrating bit about all of the toxicity on Twitter is some people will bend over backwards to find a logic to what Google's doing, whereas sometimes companies can just be illogical. And one of the big aspects of that is, if these affiliates are getting punished, but those affiliates are also hosting AdSense Google display ads. Mm-hmm. That seems peculiar, because you're going to be losing money here. So yeah, I think sometimes we're looking for an answer, but there might not even be an answer because it's just a big, massive company that's starting to come apart a little bit.
I suppose that's an interesting way of thinking. How do we maybe not harness, but weather this. It seems to me like there's a case of we've kind of got to wait and see, maybe do what we do, carry on doing what we do. But then I suppose speaking to clients about it who might be worried about it, they might be thinking, well, why do we want to do this 2,000 word piece of content that historically is right on the money from the theory side of things? Are we comfortable with saying like, well, it's too early to say what's going to happen? They've rolled stuff back in the past. It's clear there's something interesting happening.
So I think there's definitely not a one answer fits all for
on the spot.
Well, I'll kind of give a couple of reasons there. So I think for some brands where the impact of any update is relatively small, so they might lose, say 5% of the rankings, for example. I think often in those cases they might have the luxury of waiting and seeing how things even out. What we have seen from the March update is sites are losing all of their visibility. And if you say to them, oh, it's fine, things are going to turn around in August, like, well, I'm going to be bankrupt by then.
Yeah.
And that's a real kind of worry that people are having at the moment who have, relied too much on Google basically for their entire monetization for the website. And in those cases, I think we do have to be more open-minded when it comes to experimentation and taking more drastic measures, for example. And I think another kind of point on the same lines is since the big helpful content update came through in September last year, there is no evidence that a single site that was hit by that update has recovered at all in any meaningful way. And that is...
And historically it felt like there was a shot of redemption.
Absolutely.
Search Laboratory I used to work at, kind of the whole model was kind of unpicking some of these issues, disavowing links, and this sort of stuff. And it felt like, the model worked enough for them, even though it was quite a high and mighty approach.
Yeah, so I mean, recently when I was at the Prague event, there was a former Google search guy speaking there, and he basically said, no penalty, can't be recovered from, and it's just not proven. Doesn't seem to be proven true at the moment. I guess in terms of our client base, we've seen a couple of examples of where that seems to almost be, I suppose, deterministic journey towards complete obliteration in the rankings. And maybe you can if you just click on the screen share there, Dan, you'll see what is quite a common trend.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the sort of biggest frustration is the inconsistency with the messaging that Google was putting out, as well as in comparison to what we're seeing. So there was a study done over in America of this sort of helpful content update, and what they discovered was that if you were to put a disclosure on your site about affiliate links, you seem to be more heavily affected by the helpful content update, which for a number of these sites, which for here are one of our clients, you can see back in September there was the peak of their traffic, and then all of a sudden it's fallen off a cliff, which for smaller sites, as you said, is going to lead to quite serious situations in terms of their income and what they're actually able to do as a site. However, when you compare it to other sites like Daily Mail or The Sun or other sites which have what would possibly be considered stronger positive values pointing towards them in terms of a backlink profile or the number of visitors that are being visited on the site, it seems like they're less effective because Google is more willing to overlook potential negative factors like affiliate links, which they now seem to be tackling, but overlooking them because they have so many positive factors pointing towards them. So there's quite a sort of large inconsistency in terms of, well, are affiliate links a good thing or not? Because one site seems to be punished for having affiliate links, while other sites seem to be excelling even though they have affiliate links. So there's no real sort of where do we stand with it?
I think that said, with the specific example here, there were things the site were doing that were inherently wrong, objectively wrong. So they were producing AI content at scale. They lied to us about the fact they were doing it, which wasn't helpful because we were looking into other areas. And ultimately they didn't have the established domain authority to kind of ride the storm when it hit. So yeah, despite, I suppose, some heroic efforts from our D&D team to try kind of redo the entire site, they basically, as of April, have zero visibility now across search globally. So how do we turn that one around, I guess, would be the kind of coming back to the question you had, and it is really challenging. I think outside of asking Google to kind of relook at some of these sweeping classifications that it's brought in, we don't know the answer right now.
So, I mean, I guess if you were to try something, would it look like rewriting all the AI content or removing it and then asking it to re-index the site, or is that quite a naive attempt?
I think it's definitely the starting point for sure, and that's basically the advice we gave them very early doors. But they still favoured keeping like legacy, shitty quality content on the site basically. And you know, if we do subscribe to this view that there is a site level factor now as well as page level, then that's going to count against them. So that one was fairly obvious. If you wouldn't mind going to the other open tab there, Dan, the Search Console one. So this was on a much, I think you just need to share this tab.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so this was on a much larger scale where one of our client affiliate sites was going from about 1 million impressions per month up until March, and that's now fallen away to a few thousand. In this case, again, it was a little bit more, I suppose, easy to identify what they were doing wrong, and in this case it was basically what Google is calling scale content abuse. So as I mentioned at the start, this is when they use an automation to basically create articles that have no meaningful value themselves. And in this case, this is a Brazilian affiliate news portal site who has a massive database of football stats, and they were using the data they had on those stats to create editorial articles that had no human input or kind of meaningful commentary. So they were doing like match predictions, just purely looking at the form, positions, results of the teams. No flair about it whatsoever, but it was working for them. And now the March update has come in. They've fallen off a cliff, and you know it's led to quite drastic conversations. I mean, with this one, I'm a bit more optimistic because after the September update, they weren't as impacted as drastically as the brand we just looked at. But there's still going to be some turnaround to be done there with the update.
Well, and there's still a bit of subjectivity there that Google doesn't help us with, because you know, if it's a spectrum of good to bad, and bear in mind, SEO is not like a moral thing. Like, it's just work. It's not like anyone's getting murdered or anything. I don't think. Well, no. So it's one of these things where Google has so much moral terminology in this, like scaled content abuse, violation of spam policies, and it's pretty much anything. It's not just scaled content through AI. It's scaled content if you hire 20 writers. So this is kind of where it does come back to us a little bit, and we need to think: are we doing what Google would define as scaled content? Is that would it be clocked? Would it be bad? Because not how we want the world to be, but how it's currently being policed. And I think that's, again, on a day-to-day basis for a lot of people here, it would be looking at the sites that we line up for clients, or evaluate when site searching, you know, are they at risk of tanking? Are they already tanked? You know, this is where we might need to look more often, because something that might be a good site last month might not be a good site now. So I think that's something that everyone on that side of the team can be doing, to just double, triple check, because that's a really, really good way, particularly with new clients, for us to lose authority really, really quick if they go, well, this site is created, why are you giving this to me? And the same for content, the nature of content. So I think on a market growth level, it could be based around us maybe taking the client lead a bit more and saying 3 bag 4, we'll do what you say, but we're not on the hook for it. It could be around us being more selective in who we try and work with, because an affiliate is going to have a harder time than a major operator or e-commerce retailer. So that's something for us to factor in on market growth side, which we do for the non-gaming outreach that we do. But still, we may need to focus more on that. It can affect the upsells, in terms of what we're proposing to people, current clients. Because if you're giving an upsell that then doesn't pay off, that can jeopardize the existing work. So that's why it's worth thinking about all of this stuff in that context. But also that Google sees almost everything we do as spam. So it's not like, it's not that easy to draw a line these days. And as Dan was saying, some sites get rewarded, some sites get punished for the same activity.
No, Google does tend to use that very moralistic terminology when it comes to breaching their policies, but pretty much of no consequence in the real world. But yeah, I wanted to just come back to kind of the point you made about, probably practical advice for the SEO team on kind of looking to spot sites that may be harmful to our clients because they fall foul of these different things. And I'm actually going to name a couple of examples of sites where we've seen this happen over the past year, so we might have to edit out the recording.
I'll bleep it.
The first one was a gaming site called gamishard.gg that had something like 2 million organic traffic in last summer. But when you actually looked into it, the reason they had so much traffic was because they had something like 4 million pages of content on the site where they'd gone for a complete land grab of every question a gamer might have about every game. It was all AI generated. There was no real value there. When you start reading the articles, you could see it was churn and burn crap. But obviously, because the traffic was so high, they had artificially high domain authority, looked like ideal sites to put forward to our clients. And I think we use that site for the vast majority of our betting and gaming clients. And then as soon as September update hit, they went from 15 million keyword rankings to 0.
Right.
And the site was then fully de-indexed because it was considered so egregious that it was actually spam. So that was quite a harmful one. Another one, I can't remember the name of the site, but basically all it did was took non-English language news, aggregated it from different sources, and then machine translated it. So they were ranking for a lot of terms in countries like Spain, France, Italy, where on the surface they had really unique content, but actually it was just regurgitating badly English news content. And again, a site with thousands of traffic we use for a lot of our campaigns, and then an update came along, wiped out. And both of those examples were sites where those warning signs did exist beyond kind of a surface look at the metrics. If we'd actually looked into, is this a real site for real users? No, it doesn't pass the sniff test. So I think we can bring that degree of, I suppose, like critiquing to sites we're lining up. And I know that revenue kind of targets and pressures are what they are, and that's always going to lead to us looking to exhaust all options. But the long play there is the client site's going to suffer. They're going to be pissed off. We lose the client.
I was going to say, so is the risk that you're guilty by association? You could basically be seen as a toxic link. You get a penalty, or is it just that when it does get de-indexed, whatever authority it may have been passing is lost? And it's
potentially both.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, also probably a much smaller risk, but still a risk, is if people are pitching against us. And remember, we try and steal other people's clients all the time. It's
why not?
It's very unusual that there'd be a sizable client who spends what we want them to spend, who doesn't work with an agency. So that's the nature of the beast. So if someone's pitching against us and they go, "Oh, who built your links, by the way?" Because these ones are all created. That's really easy to kind of steal a client away with that situation. That's just a wound you can prod.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, and we don't really do that kind of thing too much because we try and emphasize our positives rather than other people's negatives. But other people who are don't have those qualms will be digging into our clients.
We did it a little bit recently with a new client that's come through where the client had already said, "I'm not too happy with my existing link building agency. Can you dig into what they've done?" So then it was very easy to say, "Look at all of these toxic links. Look what we can do much better."
I think that's important to consider, though, that the webmaster might not have the same approach to that. They might just think, "Oh, here's £100, £150 in my pocket to take this content and put it on their site." From our side, we might be shocked looking at a site we deem is good and think, why is it just tanked completely? But it's because 99% of the other content that they take from other providers is just rubbish. So some things are just completely out of our control, even at that webmaster level as well.
It's a fair point, but I think for all Google says about fighting kind of unmarked paid links. In reality, that as kind of a manual penalty reason has dropped substantially over the last few years, as people are becoming more adept at creating organic, natural link building content. Like we have kind of, I suppose, led the charge from as early as kind of 2015 or so. And earlier.
And so, forgive me if you talk about this and I've missed it somehow, but how much of our older clients do we do this sort of, I guess, risk testing for the backlink profile, and is it something that we're worried about how we used to view things? Because I think it's fine for the world to change and we think differently about stuff, or are we largely okay? We don't need to worry.
It's a good question, and I've given it some thought. Probably, there is a person in like one of our legacy clients, but also pretty much our largest link building client, have done things in a way I would say is non-optimum, or optimal rather, but actually that strategy has been led by the client since we started working with them, so there is kind of that level removed. One client where we kind of, I would say, got away with doing things not as well as we should have for a number of years, which came back to bite when they changed their SEO approach, was Bet365. And we essentially had full autonomy over that link building strategy for about 10 years, I think. And so at the start of the 10 years, as you can imagine, we were doing things that were perfectly acceptable in 2010, but when they were reviewed in 2020, it's like, what the hell have you guys been doing, sort of thing. So, we always need to build in what we can with that future-proofing. But, when you're talking 10 years in the SEO world, obviously a lot can change in a month, never mind a year, 10 years. So there is going to be that degree of risk, I think, regardless.
It's quite tough with prospect conversations as well, because it's a fine line between explaining the facts as opposed to looking like you're just ripping to shreds their strategy. So it's a fine balance with the stakeholder, the scenario, and the situation of who you're speaking to, whether it's an active client or a prospect.
Do we think we're through that? If we were going to have some tough conversations with our clients, do you think we're past the point where we have to worry about it, or is there still a risk that someone could be today, tomorrow?
I think, Dan, what are your feelings about, I guess, how close to completing this rollout are we with March and seeing how the land lays?
I think in terms of the update's pretty much there now. The thing is, with these core updates, is there's going to be multiple iterations of them every single year, and they say themselves it's a constantly evolving cycle of reassessment. So, as Martin has alluded to, it's one of those things that you wouldn't be surprised to see them completely reverse their decision in 6 months' time. You'd be equally not surprised to see them double down on that same decision in 6 months' time. So, in terms of the looking at link building specifically, particularly with the sort of pushing out of the search generative experience, which is going through it, it seems to us that that sort of exercise may be more pertinent in terms of where they source their information from. From our perspective, particularly when it comes to how Google figures out what is a paid link and what's not, for them it's pretty much impossible, unless they've got access to accounts and whatnot, to physically say that is a paid link.
I will say key date to look out for, other than it being Taco Day, I believe, is the 5th of May. So that is when the final part of what Google announced in March will roll out, and that is the issue of parasite SEO. So quite uniquely, rather than, I suppose, addressing this at the rollout of the March update, they kind of put sites on notice that they had 2 months to clean their act up. And from March the 5th, they're going to start going after sites who, employ these tactics. And by parasite SEO, we're essentially talking about when more established sites offer up pages or categories or subfolders for a completely unrelated purpose, purely to rank, another company they're in partnership with or another website. So some of the examples we gave before, Daily Mail will do this. I'm sure most people involved in site searching have come across Outlook India in the past, which is like one of the prime examples of parasite SEO, I guess. And I think, some of our clients, particularly in grayer markets for gaming, will have gone after quite heavily parasitic SEO as a strategy. So they could see, some of those substantial impacts to be felt from May, and then that could lead to some of the more awkward conversations you mentioned.
That's another one where we don't know if Google's going to back up what it says it's going to do,
Mm-hmm.
or is it a bit like AMP, accelerated mobile pages, where they banged on about this a long time, how to make your site fast and all this kind of stuff, and then it wasn't. Then they kind of said subsequently, "Oh, this wasn't a ranking factor at all, by the way, guys." So it's like one of these things where are they just, giving people a bit of a warning shot and hoping people do some stuff, but they're not really going to, take on big sites like Forbes, the Daily Mail, and so on. Don't know. We just need to see. And I think to start very quickly on the topic of parasitic SEO, it's probably worth saying there's probably two types. One is where the entity knows who they're getting into bed with, metaphorically, and they've got a partnership to, have a page on best VPNs or something. Then there's other cases where it's probably more black hat, where, like I said earlier, some graduate student at Harvard has the ability to create a .edu page and is taking money directly, and Harvard doesn't know anything about it. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
I think from certainly mine and Chris's perspective, Google is very sort of hush on a lot of updates that they do. So when they tend to announce something, it'll either go one of two ways. Either it'll be nothing happens, or it'll be seatbelts on, we're going for a ride. 5th of May is going to be a very interesting date to see exactly how sort of pertinent that update is going to be.
Do we have time to touch on SGE?
We could use another hour, I think, for that.
Yeah, I think we put it on the end. Perhaps a tough one. Maybe we could do another one.
Any questions?
Yeah, let's open it up. Has anyone got any questions at all they'd like to ask? Or any statements, thoughts? Kaylee?
I don't know if this is relevant, but I, as a user, started using Reddit a lot more as a search engine when Twitter got taken over, and also because you're less likely to have a site that's been sponsored. So I'll search for something like, where to find the right shoes, and then you'll get loads of adverts that say advertisement, and you get impatient and you go, where to find the right shoes? Reddit, and there'll be a subreddit for that. So I was wondering if there's a way to build more trust in that way, like whether it's tone of voice or whatever, and to capitalise on people looking for answers, and how you could maybe do that in the future.
Yeah, no, really good question. And I think, as well as Reddit, it's probably worth pointing to TikTok as kind of, a disruptive force in search. So I think, especially, younger generations are turning to TikTok more than Google now as a search tool. And I suppose the reasons for that are, ultimately they feel the needs are being better met by those platforms, whether it's a format of content, which I suspect with TikTok, whereas Reddit, like you say, it might be they feel like they're getting a more authentic answer from a real person rather than, what we know, especially in the SEO industry, a very, curated and manipulated set of results. But that being said, I think we're probably going to see, Google continue to kind of take lessons from those platforms, and we're seeing it already they've added like a short videos tab, for example, to certain results to try, I guess, take some of that potential TikTok market share away. But I think Reddit is probably in a strong position at the moment because it feels like it is, by the I suppose mainstream audience, a very widely trusted kind of platform still. I think if we continue to see these sort of like paid partnerships with Google and other big corporations where big data is everything, then maybe that will start to disrupt in its own way. I'll open it up.
Well, Chris, I was going to say, would you say, given what we know about what we don't know, is it safe to basically stick with the core principles that we know kind of have been working? Like EEAT still should probably be something we do. We try to add authority. We try to add that like user-led or rather experiential element to the content we create. It'd be nice to work with real people, influencers. We do try to do that, and I guess try and add that authenticity wherever we can, given the tools we have.
Yeah, I think with this, it comes down to what we're saying about that testing, experimentation, implementation. So we'll get a good idea pretty quickly when working with a brand what's hitting and what's not when it comes to content strategy, and then replicating that ultimately. So I do think we've got the luxury of being quite iterative when it comes to like determining what is the right format, the right style, the right word count, etc. for any given topic. And obviously there's a lot of insights you can glean just from a competitor look at top 10 results, what are the patterns.
Yeah, I think focusing on common sense, which is a very vague term, but not artificially adding an author bio if it's not something that would crop up, or if they don't have somebody, like fabricating a person doesn't seem to make sense. Even if Google can't currently police it, they probably will. So I think that's the point about Reddit. If it serves a purpose, and I think we all will do that if we want an immediate answer or a personal recommendation. But as soon as that starts to get polluted, and the first 5 Reddit answers are interspersed with like rubbish, you'll move on to something else. So it's like a treadmill. And I think what Google's really conscious of is people stepping away from Google and not really coming back. So I think that's kind of where there is some incentive for them to make sure there is use value. But as we've talked about this, it seems like a lot of these updates right now, right this second, are not very logical. Because it doesn't seem to be making sense. So that's the difficult part. But yeah, that's also a really good question.
Thank you. Do you want to say? Roger.
How long does it take before people find the new workaround and loopholes with this stuff? Because that will surely happen. So, using your example, like if I'm searching when is White Lotus Hotel season 3 going to come out, no one knows that. All of a sudden, if there's no pages, how long before someone finds a way to get those pages back? Will that happen eventually? Will people find those ways?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think definitely they will find ways, and I think what we're seeing for those sort of questions are more open-ended discussions, so working well. And right now it feels like Reddit has almost got a monopoly over any unknown questions, because Google's like, right, this is a question we don't know the answer to, let's get loads of people kind of speculating about it. I do think we'll see a rebalance probably in the next month or so when it comes to those two monopolist sites in particular. And I think at that stage we'll be able to say what are some of the other quick win tactics we can look to leverage, because right now it does feel, I guess, quite closed off to be able to break through in those, I suppose what you'd say are more black hat or shadier ways of trying to rank.
I think also with that example of when is White Lotus season 3 coming out, there's always going to be an answer given. Google's not going to say we don't know, so we're not going to give you any pages to look at.
Yeah.
But I think what that might mean is the nature of the pages. So it could be, as Chris sort of alluded, they'll send you to the HBO page or a forum where people are speculating about it, not some massive Daily Mail article with 7 ads in the middle that doesn't give you the answer. I mean, I would hope that would be the case, because at least you're getting some kind of answer that might be relevant to your interests, rather than just, waffle. But I mean, again, like I said, we don't really know. But I mean, there'll always be some answer. Somebody's got to come out number one. That's also why some of these defenses of Google recently don't really hold water, because you can say, oh yeah, that site deserves to fall back. But look at the 2 sites that have replaced it. They're worse. So this is where it doesn't quite stack up to say that, oh yeah, everything's in hand, just trust Google. Because yeah, okay, that site did a few dodgy things, but not as bad as these ones. So that's tricky.
I think in the short term as well, kind of just cementing a Reddit and Quora strategy for big brands as well is going to be important, because I think we were talking about it probably when we started seeing Reddit moving up, probably last September, October. Our advice, without the hindsight, was kind of things will probably change by Christmas, and then it was by summer, and then we're 6 months in, and kind of the time to ride that ship is coming to an end. So yeah, I think it's about spotting what is the next trend, the next opportunity early, and then not being afraid to experiment with it. I think by the time the wider industry notices that these formats are in the most success, it's almost too late a lot of the time.
I think that's why people are jumping on those trends mentioned at the start, like ranch style SEO, because as I said, you can sort of competitively position it as an advantage and say this seems to cater to what we now need to rank well, so you should do it, you should do it, you should do it. Whether it does work in the long term is definitely too early to say, but I think that's the methodology behind what other experts are trying to piggyback on this update with.
Yeah, and ultimately, as long as you're not doing anything that's going to kind of burn your bridges over the long term by getting like a manual penalty, for example, then there is the freedom to be creative in strategy.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, so I've got two questions. I'm sorry if this seems an obvious one, but how do you think these updates benefit Google? Because from this discussion, it doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem logical. And because if I'm not wrong, you also said that it is probably going to impact PPC and the display network, so that means Google close business too. And do you think these updates will negatively impact the amount of money businesses spend on SEO?
Very good question. Do you want to give the commercial view first of all?
Well, yeah, I mean, we didn't really touch on SGE that much in this talk. Like Chris said, we probably need another one on it, but some of those principles will involve obviously dragging in like an AI answer based on their learning models. And some of that in some cases can take up a lot of the first page. So you think that currently from an SEO point of view, the goal is to get page 1, rank 1, because that gives you the best chance of conversion, the most, traffic share from a keyword. To think that you could now actually be very far down that page despite being top ranking, or even on page 2, likely means that your user base might decrease, might mean that the click-through rate goes down. So there's that to consider, which ties into it. And then there's also, in terms of like helpful content itself, commercially, if we've got an active client that tanks, they probably won't be making the income to spend with us anymore. And also prospect clients might not be willing to engage in the conversation, so they can't actually, even have that conversation with us. In terms of Google profiting and making money, we probably didn't touch on it as heavily as we should have done in this session, but the partnership with Reddit is actually really lucrative for them, I believe. So I think that they're finding different ways to monetize what they're doing with their search engines. And I believe some of the stuff with the PPC stuff will have a big monetary impact for Google itself. Don't know if you want to segue in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's definitely sort of discussions being had in terms of what they're going to be doing from a PPC perspective. One of those things is potentially moving ads to like a referral model. So on top of bidding on keywords, they could charge a fee in terms of essentially being their own affiliate and charging a percentage of the transaction that takes place to sort of claw back some of that revenue. Another thing which was announced yesterday was the introduction of automated ads. So again, with the reduction potentially of click-through rate because of the search generative experience, what they'll be able to do should site owners opt in via AdSense is actually allow Google to scan their content pages for particular keywords. It could be a content piece about iPhones versus Samsung versus Google Pixel, for example. But what it will do is highlight keywords such as iPhone, Samsung Galaxy, Google Pixel, and actually turn those keywords into generative ads. So you can actually filter out those keywords and gain sort of revenue from that as well. So they are finding ways around it. It is a bit of a sort of grey area at the moment. As I said, it was only announced yesterday, but our first thoughts around it are, if you've got an e-commerce client talking about a particular product and they haven't got their internal linking strategy sort of up to scratch, does that open them up to potentially having competitors advertise on their website? So yeah, bit of a grey area at the moment. But
yeah, I would say the biggest limiter on SGE at the minute is that worry, I guess, about the impact on ad revenue bottom line. So it whilst it's being tested more broadly in the US, it's still not in any official rollout. They've not announced when it'll be. So I think until they figure out how to protect those revenue streams, we're not going to see it, be as disruptive as we thought it might have been going into this year. And sorry, your second question, I've forgotten a bit.
Yeah. So the second question I had is more from a link building perspective. So of course we are always looking to bring in new sites and considering link building is a major part of our SEO service. And we have witnessed significant drop in traffic on websites. So how do you see this affecting this specific service in the long run, and how do we navigate through this? And this could also mean that webmasters could come back to us with maybe stricter guidelines in terms of what they're accepting. So what are we doing as an agency to kind of navigate through this, especially from the content team's perspective as well? Because like you guys said, it is going to depend on the kind of content we write as well.
Yeah, great. No, thanks for that. So I think first of all, from kind of the wider business look, and then maybe Matt, you can help us with some of the content related bits. We, I suppose, have identified for a couple of years now that link building isn't necessarily like an existential risk, but it's certainly not quite as prominent as it was, say, 5-6 years ago. And as a result, we've, I suppose, followed what we've been telling our clients to do, and that's to kind of diversify the strategies that they're deploying. So, if you go back 3-4 years ago, we didn't have a digital PR team in the agency. We didn't really do much in the way of design and development, client-facing work. We didn't do any PPC. So we've, I suppose, looked to de-risk the extent to which we can in building out those other service lines where we are seeing potential and opportunities. I do feel like paid media is definitely one that we're going to see a lot of traction on over the next couple of years. For link building itself, I think ultimately what we're seeing is, regardless of what Google says, links are still and have remained kind of the biggest differentiator when it comes to a site's kind of perceived authority in their eyes. So as long as that kind of keeps working, and I feel like, there's no signs it's not going to, then there's always going to be a place for link building. The pool of sites, I guess, there is kind of that, slightly pessimistic view that if search becomes AI driven, that's going to squeeze out the smaller publishers and the sort of sites we'd work with for link building. But I think it's kind of too early to say. In that respect, I think the publishers will always find a way of ultimately monetizing, staying afloat, and building that authority. So yeah, I guess for us as an agency, I'm less concerned about our prospects than I am for, say, a smaller like blog site who relies on Google revenues to keep them afloat.
From an on-site content perspective, I'd say, at the end of the day, when you visit a website, you want to read about whatever it is that the service is offering. So there's always going to be a need for us to produce that content. And there's two ways of looking at on-site content as well, is that of the traffic you have, what is the content doing to encourage those users to do what you want them to do on the site? And there's lots that we can continue doing well to convert those. But there is the other way of looking at it, or thinking about the content that we produce, is that we're essentially producing more content to publicize our clients more by basically casting the net and getting more rankings. From the results we see from our clients, our methodologies, our strategies are working well for that currently. From a pivoting perspective, I think there is definitely room for us to include more of a multimedia approach to those things, perhaps enriching it with video, experimenting more with social content as a way of passing people to the websites. But I feel realistically there's always going to be a need for good content on the client's websites. How effective that is with the current strategies is something that we're obviously at a bit of a turning point now, but it seems reasonable that it has to be good, convincing, and ideally is able to capitalize on basically helping us rank. All the principles we have of identifying keywords that are high value, and then using them on the site in a useful way through thoughtful structure and variations of them to actually not only spread them throughout the content, but then answer questions or answer queries or discuss the topic in a way that's useful. That I feel like will still remain, for now at least.
Yeah, and we might see a bit of a switch, between, I guess, acquisition funnel content to more conversion optimized, transactional, and I think that seems to be the biggest risk in terms of SGE. What's going to happen to those informational searches? But again, could do an hour on that, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, let's say I think it all comes down to what I touched on earlier in terms of user accomplishment. Have they actually gone to that site and found or done what they're looking for. So yeah, particularly when it comes to the search engine experience, then they may be able to find out information through that generative result, but what's going to set aside the actual organic rankings, what it's going to be the experience, expertise, authoritativeness and trustworthiness. It's going to be the user experience and that user accomplishment. So they're going to be the separators in the future. So as long as we're focusing content around those parameters, then yeah, like I said, there's always going to be that place and that positive reward for helpful content.
I think the problem you've got with link building is kind of what I mentioned halfway through, is that we can't control what other content they take for the site. So we could be doing everything to the best of our abilities, but they could be taking 10 other pretty poor pieces of content that are going to impact it quite heavily. So there's that challenge, but I don't actually know how to solve that challenge.
I think that's something we might want to take into the future, though, to say when we're brokering deals, we might say, look, we plan to give you 20 article placements over the next 6 months. If you want that money, you cannot do this type of content, or we'll cut you off. It's a two-way street, I think.
Yeah.
And I think we also look at more high-quality link building, premium sites, even sponsored content. I think I'm adamant there's demand for that. I'm positive there's demand for that. Even if it isn't a ranking factor, I still think it's part of the mix, along with digital PR. I'm positive that there's demand for that. So I think that might also protect people, I think, from getting penalties. Although a lot of what we talk about, I don't think it's penalties. I think it is literally a more sweeping decision about what type of site ranks. So I think we probably also could do another half hour on what is a penalty. But I think you probably need to be a bit cautious about how we use that phrase as well.
Thank you. Well, we have a room, but does anyone have any burning questions? We're all here as well, and perhaps we can discuss it in the whole team chat. It might be a nice forum for us to ask any other questions we have going forward. But otherwise, thanks for listening. Thanks for coming. And there we go.